Story 1. I've been meaning to write about this for a long time on Glitch in the Matrix, as this is one of the strangest and most inexplicable moments in my life. It could of course be one major coincidence. As a background to this, I should share that I have a condition known as bipolar disorder type 1. This basically means that I have a tendency to move between depressive moods and high energy, low sleep, and sometimes psychotic, manic episodes in which my connection to reality begins to slip. Or maybe I'm just aware of the illusory nature of this existence. Hard to say. If you're in reading further, I did an AMA a while back. So, on to what happened. I can't exactly recall specifically what set me off, but after a couple of days of no sleep and seeing bizarre synchronicities everywhere, synchronicities being coincidences that seem to have a deeper meaning, I started to question if this life is real or some sort of massive simulation. I ended up rewatching the movie The 13th Floor. Spoiler alert. In the movie, the main character creates a simulation, only to suspect that his own world is a simulated reality. So he learns about a test that can prove whether or not the world is real. All you need to do is start driving without any plans. Go someplace you've never gone before. Roadblocks and impediments will appear. If you drive through these roadblocks, you'll eventually reach the edge of the simulation, where everything will be pixelated and show obvious signs that it's digital. So I said, why not try it? I got in my car, got on a major road that I'd only driven a couple miles east on, and just started driving. I had absolutely no destination in mind, and I had no idea where that road would take me. I figured that I would drive for a half hour or so and see what happened, but I barely made it 5 minutes before I noticed cop cars speeding past me. As I made it to the maybe 3 or 4 mile mark on the trip, I came to an intersection blocked by dozens of cop cars. I had to come to a complete stop. I was absolutely stunned. I sat there for several minutes in shocked silence. Immediately after I decide to test out the universe, it delivers right back to me one giant back up and go home response. As I sat there, a policewoman walked up and informed me that a shooting had just occurred a few minutes ago. Like, right before I had started driving. Almost as if the designer of the simulation said, "Oh fuck, we have another runner. Better throw up a roadblock, fast." I considered going around the incident and then continuing, but at that point my mind was too thoroughly fucked with to continue. I decided to go home. The thoughts have never ceased to trouble me. Was this all some colossal coincidence and I just ran into it? Or was I actually testing the boundaries of our artificial universe, and a roadblock was put there to stop me from causing problems? In response to the most common questions, why didn't I continue? Given the extreme nature of the roadblock, a shooting, I figured that I had enough. If I was wrong and it was a coincidence, no big deal. In the less likely scenario that I was in a simulation, I was concerned about what would happen next. An explosion? Car crash? Also, I knew that it was time to increase the meds and get some sleep, so there was that too. Why don't you try again? This happened 3 years ago, and since then I've driven extensively in my city. It's impossible for me to go somewhere now without knowing where the road ends. I would have to go a few hours just to start another experiment. Are you still crazy? I'm on my meds and very stable currently, but thanks for the concern. Aren't we all a little crazy in our own unique ways, though? Story 2. This happened a couple of years ago in Inverness, Scotland, in the Eastgate Shopping Centre. I was studying in Scotland for my undergrad, and 3 other friends and I decided to take a quick trip north to Inverness and see Loch Ness, etc. for part of our spring break. It was around 4:45 p.m., and since Inverness is a relatively small town, shops close at 5 p.m. Therefore, we collectively decided to leave the mall and go into the town for some dinner. One of my friends, S, really wanted to go to Topshop, which was in the mall. We told her we wouldn't have enough time to look properly and promised her we'd come back to the mall the next day, as we didn't have much to do anyways. In order to leave the mall, we needed to walk down a long hall. As we walked down this hall, we saw a Forever 21 at the end of it, which had an escalator inside of it that would lead out of the mall towards one of the main entrances that was next to an M&S. As I walked into Forever 21, things got a bit quiet. I could still hear things, but it almost seemed as if sound was a bit muffled. I didn't really pay too much attention to this at the time, but remarked it in retrospect. I remember talking to my friend A and commenting on a bunch of shirts that said Tokyo, saying something along the lines that I wish they had a shirt with the name of the city I'm originally from. She responded to this, and we browsed until a woman came up to us and told us we needed to leave since the store was closing soon. We accepted this and continued our chat as we rode down the escalator that led us out of the mall. I remember telling A that we should come back the next day, since we were already planning to come back to the mall. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and as planned, we returned to the mall the next day. We went to Topshop, a couple of other stores, and then A and I decided we wanted to go to Forever 21. We both knew the exact way, past the Starbucks on the top floor and down the long hallway. To our surprise, we saw an HMV in its place instead. I wasn't too concerned, as I thought we must have just made a mistake and that it was somewhere else in the mall. I remember searching everywhere, checking the mall map, and even going to the outside of the mall to the M&S and seeing that the entrance we'd come out of the day before indeed led up to an HMV. At this point, A and I began to grow concerned, certain that the HMV was where the Forever 21 was supposed to be. I went into various stores and asked the attendants where the Forever 21 was. They all gave me a confused look and said that not only was there no Forever 21 in the mall, but there wasn't any in the whole of Inverness. At this point, A and I began to grow faint and sick. We were extremely disturbed as we both were certain we had seen that before and shared the same account of how to get to the store, our conversation within the store, and the attendant asking us to leave. Our two other friends, L and S, looked at us as if we were crazy and said there'd never been a Forever 21 the day before. They figured that we were just looking for it aimlessly. This caused a big argument as L and S were adamant that we had never left the mall through a Forever 21, but A and I were dead certain about it. We were made fun of and called crazy, but A and I truly remember the same event. Weirdly enough, I don't remember seeing or speaking to L and S in the store, almost as if they didn't exist. I've never honestly been so scared or disturbed in my life, but the fact that my friend shares my memory and experience gives me some solace. My other friends to this day are still certain we never went to Forever 21, yet when I ask them to tell me exactly how we left the mall, they cannot provide me with a conclusive answer. I still think about this a lot, and I've had many odd experiences in my life, but this is one of the oddest. Maybe I had gone into the future, where Forever 21 will be. HMV could easily become antiquated. Or maybe I was in another dimension. Can anyone help or provide some theories on this? Anything is appreciated. Story 3. Late 90s. So all the employees of a store that went out of business are having a little get-together as we say our goodbyes to people who are moving, remember fun at work, help each other with future plans, etc. People are telling different stories, happy, sad, angry, funny, and I get asked to tell some. I was on a roll and reminded people of several backroom antics and things that took place in and around the store. They requested I tell another, and I was fresh out of things I remembered, except for one, and it wasn't up to par with the other stories I told. So I embellish. Real. Me climbing on a shelf and over a mannequin, throwing down what I needed to the boss, and climbing back over while he made a joke about the mannequin being under me. My hilarious version. Me fumbling around and the boss red in the face laughing while I humped the mannequin before climbing down. Some time passes and our old boss, who was not at this get-together, gets a hold of someone and tells us all to come to his house. We go and drink, talk more, laugh, and things are going great. Everyone's having fun. All of a sudden, someone requests the boss's version of my story. I'm petrified. I know that he's just going to tell the regular version of the events. He's gonna say I was climbing over and climbing back. He proceeds to tell the exact same telling of events I made up earlier in the day, even giving more detail, but it matches exactly with what I said. No one was there to tell him ahead of time. Cell phones weren't prevalent amongst us, and even if someone had, what would have been the point? Story 4. My grandparents have both passed quite a few years ago, but one of the stories that they told me has stuck with me all these years. Grandpa and Grandma were driving through Pennsylvania to an old family farm. The farm belonged to his uncle and cousins who lived there. Grandpa was a city kid and had visited the farm every summer for years when he was growing up. It was around 25 years since he'd been there, but he loved that farm and wanted to introduce Grandma to his cousins and show her around. As they drove closer to the farm, Grandpa began to tell Grandma about the little town that was on the road on the way to the farm. Soon, they reached the little town, and Grandpa was amazed that it hadn't changed a bit. Towards the end of the town, they saw that a hotel was on fire. The road was blocked by firemen using an old-fashioned fire wagon with a water tank pulled by horses. And they thought it was strange, but they chalked this up to being in rural Pennsylvania. Eventually, the water wagon moved and they could drive on. They reached the farm, and after greeting Grandpa's uncle and cousins, they shared the news of the fire at the hotel. Grandpa suggested that they all go down and see if they could help. The relatives looked shaken. That's when one of the cousins explained that there was no town. Not anymore. About 20 years before, the hotel burned down, and the fire spread to most of the small town's main street. After their businesses were lost, people left the town. In fact, the uncle and cousins were the last people living in the area. Grandpa and Grandma couldn't believe it. They had just seen the town, the fire, even smelled the smoke. Grandpa, Grandma, and some cousins got in the car and drove back to town, going back the same way they came in. And the town was gone. Just some burnt-out shells of a few buildings remained. Story 5. So, I recently discovered this subreddit and can't wait to read more of all your experiences, but I want to share mine first. This happened about 2 years ago when I was going through the necessary classes to be able to take my driving test to get my license. The classroom portion of the class was several sessions of 3 hours and was done through my local YMCA. It's about halfway through the course and halfway through tonight's class, so I'll say it was around 7:30 p.m. Now, the classroom is fairly large, and the tables and chairs were set up in a U shape that made it so everyone's back was to a wall. One of the walls was lined with windows, and that just so happened to be the wall my back was turned to. It was the middle of the lecture, and we were learning about the proper technique of merging onto a highway. The teacher was drawing the roads on the board when all of a sudden I heard a window shattering, followed by the loudest ringing/buzzing sound in my ears. At the same time, it was as if someone had slammed my head into the table with an incredible amount of force. The most startling thing was that when my head hit the table, I didn't feel it. As a matter of fact, I didn't feel anything. My head felt lighter, but for some reason I couldn't move a muscle. It felt as if my entire body was locked in place while everyone in the room started screaming. I could hear the sounds of chairs being knocked over as some people ran, and I even heard a few people vomiting onto the tile floor. This whole time I was just staring at the white table that was now covered in my brain matter and blood. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. And then, in an instant, I was back. Everything was normal again except for a slight ringing sensation in my ear. I immediately turned around to see the window still intact behind me, and the teacher had just began to draw the picture of the highway on the board again. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night, and I sure as hell wasn't going to drive home when my dad came to pick me up. Story 6. I live on the far west/north side of town, but I work in the heart of the city. I used to drive and park, but when I realized I could take a single bus a block from my house and it would drop me off across the street to the building I work in, and I started riding the big green limousine. 3 days of parking was the same cost as a 2-week bus pass, not to mention the gas saved and the lack of stress dealing with downtown driving. Anyhow, I've been doing this for 9 months, and I've got it down to a routine. I leave my house at the same time every day. I see the same people at my bus stop. A young woman about 20 gets off at the engineering college. A mom and her young son always get off to transfer to another bus that this one runs right by the end of the line for, and a guy who works at the local cable company who I talk to on a regular basis gets off at the transfer point for another bus that heads deep east in town. 4 days a week I have the same bus driver, Frances. She's a very friendly lady, and on nights I don't sleep well and doze off, she's been known to get up from the driver's seat and gently shake my shoulder to wake me. My stop is the last stop on the line. After my stop, she hits the downtown terminal and turns around. Most days, there's 2 other people that get off on my stop. An older lady that works in my building is a teller in the bank on the first floor, and a younger guy with long pencil-thin dreadlocks that he has tied in a ponytail. He always pulls the cord for the bell as soon as we pass the stop before ours. The manner of his dress says he works in a business casual environment, but not in my building. On Thursdays and Fridays, there's another younger woman who also gets off at our stop. Very pretty, dresses sharp, and works in my building. When I stop at the coffee shop in the lobby, she turns and enters the first bank of elevators. She either works for the bank itself or for the investment firm that is housed on the upper teens floors. Like I said, routine. Today, it was different. The front of the bus has 2 rows of 3 that are turned so the backs face the windows. These are for the elderly or disabled travelers. They can fold up so wheelchairs can go there. I always sit in the first seat on the driver's side that faces forward. The young guy sits 1 seat back from me, but on the other side of the aisle. The bank teller lady sits in the way back. Today, after most of the passengers clear out, there was a girl sitting in the disabled and elderly seats. Not a big deal, people sit there. They just have to give them up for an elderly or disabled. She had multicolored hair, mostly green and blue, held back with a scrunchie, wearing a red, black, gray flannel shirt, not tucked in, but buttoned up over a black t-shirt, a pair of jeans, and a pair of high-top sneakers. I remember what she was wearing for a couple reasons. One, I've gotten older, but in my youth I was big into the alternative scene, and she was dressed like a lot of the girls I hung out with back in the day. These were the girls I found attractive. 2, physically she was cute, fit, well-proportioned. Here's where the glitch starts. I think of her, and I know she was cute, but I can't picture her face at all. No features, no makeup, no piercings, nothing. All the things I would look for or at and get the idea of cute, and it's coming back totally blank. But I can picture every article of clothing she wore, including the black and silver bands she had on her right wrist and silver rings on her left hand. I can tell you her shoes were Chuck T's, not black but a red flannel pattern, similar but not the same as her shirt. But I can't picture her face at all. Her fingernail polish was black but chipped in a few places and needed a retouch, but again, I can't picture her face. Maybe for other people that's normal, but not for me. I can picture clear details about her. Stuff that I never notice, stuff my girlfriend gives me crap about for not noticing on her. But I can picture this girl sitting in front of me crystal clear, and it's 4 hours later, and I still have this image of this girl in my head, clear as a bell. There's a couple stops left, and she turns from sitting back to leaning forward and looking towards the front of the bus, looking out the big open window, down the main avenue out at the lakefront. I remember, to my embarrassment, noticing that her rear fit those jeans very well in a perfect apple bottom. I remember her turning her head to look at me over her shoulder. I have the distinct impression of her smiling before turning her attention back forward again. We pass the second to last stop. I look over at the young guy as he pulls the cord. He yawns, wide, uncovered. I smirk and yawn as well, invoked by his yawn. I rub my eyes, and when the fog leaves them, she's not there. Confused, I look around the bus, like somehow in the half a second she moved out of my view, like behind me. The young guy is doing the same thing. We look at each other, then at where she was sitting and back to each other, and we both have this what the fuck look on our face, like we both know what happened, but neither of us can figure it out. The bus comes to our stop. Still confused, I get up and walk to the front of the bus to get off. "See you tomorrow, Francis." "Yeah, she should be back tomorrow." I turn around after I get off the bus, and instead of the chubby, giggly, warm black lady that took my fare when I got on, it's some skinny old white guy with a long face and big bushy mustache. He smiles, closes the door, and drives off. The young guy who got off with me pauses and opens his mouth like he's going to say something to me, then just walks off, shaking his head and rubbing his neck. The cashier lady, who exited from the back door of the bus, stands next to me, waiting to cross the street, chuckles and looks up to me. It's going to be an odd day today. I can just feel it, you know. I still don't even know how to feel about what happened. Part of me is a little freaked out. I've never had something like this happen to me. The weirder part is the niggling little voice in the back of my head just saying, "Forget it. It's not important." I wanted to write this down in case I did forget it. I wanted proof for myself, you know? Story 7. I've had this account for a while, but I've never really used it, so I'm pretty new here and I'm not entirely sure about all the formatting. But basically, to preface, I go to a Catholic school, so my parents have to pay tuition for me to go to school there, and we're not rich by any means. Working class. And so I'm on a lot of financial aid, about half my tuition cost. And because my financial aid was, or rather still is, as I'm only a junior, so much, after school ended, all of us on financial aid would be assigned a room, and mine was up on the 3rd floor, science floor now, that used to house nuns who lived at the school. But that's irrelevant to this. And I would clean the room, just spray the desks down with the cleaner, straighten them, sweep, clean the whiteboards, do whatever. And the teacher whose room would sometimes ask me to do a few extra things here and there because she was a physics teacher in her 2nd year of teaching at my school, so there would be some toys and such laying around the room that her students would forget to put away themselves. It really only took maybe 10 minutes extra at the most, and my carpool just waited for me to be done, and by that time the bulk of the traffic had calmed down, so the streets were a lot freer of cars and it was a quicker drive. The year itself passes by without anything unusual happening in regards to this, and towards the end of the year, the teacher started talking about moving. I asked where she was moving to, and she responded with a Central American country, Panama, I believe, which surprised me, as I live in the Midwest of America, so that would be a long ways away. From our idle chat, either she or her husband had found a really nice job there, and so they were moving there for a few years, and she wouldn't be teaching at my school anymore, for which I was kind of glad because even though I liked her, I wanted to take physics my senior year, and I was worried at that point I would inevitably start failing her class, as then I hadn't been diagnosed, let alone treated for ADHD and depression, and those things really did start affecting my grades as I got older, so I wouldn't have to worry about having her and disappointing her with my grades then. But I really did like her, and I thought she was a nice person, and I was sad to see her leave. Doing that in of itself wasn't anything weird. It was just normal for me after a while. And part of a routine. Spray and straighten the desks, sweep and put the books away, make small talk with her if she was in the room, she usually was, and leave and check off on the list that I cleaned her room. They didn't make me do it after that year, so I could just go straight away after school. They got a new physics teacher, a guy this time, and he was in a different room than hers because some of the teachers switched classrooms for one reason or another, and that didn't strike me as abnormal, just whatever. And sophomore year was normal. I'm a junior now. We're about 2 weeks from the end of the first quarter, and we were doing ACT practice in the new physics teacher's room. It wasn't the first time we'd done this. A certain group of juniors would go up to this room that was based on our homerooms and take parts of the practice test and such, and he knew my name already when he called out attendance for the test, but I never thought much of it. He knew plenty of other students who'd never had him before. But the freaky part is, this comment he made to me, he referenced me cleaning his room 2 years ago about how sometimes he would have things up on the whiteboard and ask me to leave them there, or just clean it all, or not even bother. I did those things, but with him, I never cleaned his room, ever. I only ever cleaned the old teacher's room. I gave him a confused look and told him I never cleaned his room, and he told me that he's been there for years, that this is his 4th year at my school. I just brushed it off and left the room to go to my next class, figuring maybe he was confusing me with someone else or something. I very much remember that I cleaned her room. I remember her talking about her son, and I remember her voice. I remember her talking about how we were both vegetarians. I remember her. When I went home, I looked into my freshman yearbook to look for her just to see that he wasn't in there. But he was. I flipped through every single page and I couldn't find one picture of her. No other staff members remember her. Story 8. I work overnights at a small store. Aside from the key and code locked door in the back for deliveries, there's only one door in or out of the store. When anyone steps into the store, a buzz sounds, kind of like a doorbell, which alerts staff that there is a customer entering or that one left. Something I find useful, especially when working alone, as I'm not always right at the registers to see the doors. Sometimes the bell goes off and no customers have entered, which can be caused by newspaper deliverers dropping off the papers or a particularly large bug or anything else really, so nothing too strange if I hear the bell and the store is empty. However, there have been a few occasions where I've been close to the front of the store when the bell goes off and seen someone enter, only to look around for them a bit later when they haven't finished shopping, to find the store empty. Obviously, if they'd left, I'd have heard the bell. The most recent time this occurred, I had exited an aisle at the sound of the bell and saw a man enter. He looked a bit older, heavily lined face, though based on the worn and dirty state of his jeans and black hoodie, he may have been younger than he appeared, but artificially aged by whatever hardships he clearly faced. I greeted him and asked if he needed assistance. In a gruff yet somehow faded voice, and without looking at me, he declined and continued along into another aisle. Some 15 minutes later, I scanned the store and didn't see him anywhere, so I checked the camera footage. It was so eerie, I have chills thinking about it. The footage clearly shows me in the aisle I'd been working in, and at about the time I'd estimate the man arrived, I pause in my work. I just stand there, still, for a handful of seconds, and then resume my work. I only left the aisle later to scan the area for the customer. I don't know what to make of this. I distinctly recall seeing him and greeting him. I can remember minute details about him, but clearly on film, he was never there, and I never moved to greet anyone. I don't always work alone. Until last night, I'd only experienced these vanishing customers when I was by myself, but last night I had a coworker with me. Around 2 a.m., the buzzer on the store's entrance went off, signaling the arrival of a customer. My coworker looked up at the sound, but I was closer to the front of the store, so she resumed working while I went to greet the customer. A tallish woman in a suit that looked fairly expensive had entered, and I asked her if she needed any assistance with anything. She seemed to either ignore me or not hear me, not looking my way as she continued further into the store. That kind of reaction isn't common, but not rare enough to cause concern, so I resumed my work. A few minutes later, I heard the bell at the front counter ring. I was near the center of the store with my coworker near the back, so I told her I'd get it and headed for the register. There was nobody there, and I quickly scanned the aisles to see if the customer had simply stepped away from the register after ringing for assistance. The store had no customers. I asked my coworker if she'd seen where the woman went, and she told me she hadn't seen her at all, though she'd heard the buzzer when she entered. I said it was strange that she'd ring the bell and then seemingly hide or something, and my coworker gave me a weird look as she told me the bell hadn't rung and she'd been confused when I told her I'll get it before. I proceeded to get really freaked out. We headed behind the register as I started to tell her about my previous experiences with vanishing customers, which her expression made clear she did not believe, though she held back from stating her disbelief. Just as I began describing the events in my previous post, the buzzer on the door went off, and in walked the exact same woman I'd seen enter the store before. I'm sure I looked foolish just staring at her in shock, but she didn't look at me. She didn't look at my coworker when she asked her if she needed any assistance either. She seemed to just ignore her or not hear her, as she'd done with me. As soon as the customer rounded into an aisle and out of earshot, I quickly told my coworker the situation, that this woman had entered the store minutes before and had not exited before re-entering. By this point, my coworker looked pretty concerned, like she thought I'd lost my mind. Half a minute later, the customer returned to the front and approached the register, which I was standing behind. She placed a can of Starbucks coffee and her store rewards card on the counter, then glanced over to the bell, hesitated a moment, and rang it. I was pretty shaken by the whole thing, but kept my composure, greeting her in my usual upbeat way and asking if she'd like a bag. Again, she didn't reply or look at me or seem to register that I'd spoken at all. I rang in her card and coffee, and she put her credit card into the chip reader. When the payment approved, she took her things and left. My coworker remarked that her behavior was odd, but I was already heading away from the register and toward the office. My coworker followed me in. I pulled up footage from some of the cameras telling her that we needed to check what happened to the customer after the first time she entered. The footage showed the door slide open, but nobody was there. As stated in my previous post, sometimes large bugs or seemingly nothing activates the door and buzzer, so my coworker didn't find that odd. What she did find odd was that on the footage, instead of exiting the aisle to check the door as she'd seen me do, I stood stationary for a few seconds and then continued working. I paused the footage, freaking out internally, and my coworker blurted, "What the fuck is happening right now?" We resumed the footage. A bit later, it showed me as I told my coworker, "I'll get it," and proceeded to the front and then around the store as I searched for the customer who, according to the cameras, was never there. We reviewed the footage from her second visit and everything appeared normal, aside from her weirdly ignoring both of us. It was entirely uneventful. Then we talked about the earlier footage, and neither of us could come up with a reason the cameras weren't showing what we both remembered occurring. Honestly, I hope you guys can come up with some kind of logical explanation for this. My coworker seems really concerned about this whole thing, and understandably so, as much as I'd like assurance that this can be explained away from my own peace of mind, I'm really more concerned for her. I have this feeling like she wasn't supposed to be a part of this. This is the only time anyone else has witnessed this happening, and it previously kind of felt like my thing. So, help us out, guys. Story 9. I experienced this a few days ago and have been deeply unsettled and anxious since then. I stumbled across this subreddit purely by chance yesterday, saw some screenshots on Tumblr, so maybe I was meant to share this story? A few nights ago, I was laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. I had just reached that moment between sleep and awake, when you're still conscious and can still feel your body in bed, but you know you're slipping into sleep. I had a sudden feeling that if I fell asleep at that moment, I would have a nightmare, so I forced my eyes open to wake myself up. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a totally different situation. I was still laying in a bed, but in a room that wasn't my dorm. I was wearing a blue pajama shirt, and I could see my hands were thin and spotted and wrinkled. The bed had a white duvet, and I was surrounded by people who, by their appearance, looked like they could be my family, even though I've never seen them before. They looked concerned, and they were all staring at me. I distinctly remember the face of a young girl with pigtails. She looked to be around 10 or 11, had a round face and big dark eyes, and was leaning forward over the baseboard to look at me better. Then, against my own will, I fell back against the pillow, my eyes shut, and I experienced a feeling similar to sleep, where everything goes dark and all sensation fades away, but it felt deeper and emptier than normal sleep. And then I opened my eyes, and I was back in my dorm and in my normal twin bed. The vision only lasted maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but it put me in a full panic fight or flight mode. I was gasping for air and shaking. It felt as if I'd just come back from death. And then the feeling settled into me that the moment I experienced was my actual death, far, far in the future. There's a chance this could have just been a dream, since I was falling asleep right before, but when I felt that I was falling asleep, I was definitely still conscious and had the willpower to try and wake myself up, the result of many attempts at lucid dreaming. I also thought this might be a variation on the typical you feel like you're falling and you suddenly wake up, but I've never experienced a vision in that situation, nor did I feel like I was physically falling any time during my glitch. To be honest, I'm still super unsettled and I don't know what really happened. It's been a few days, but I can't shake this feeling of dread that one day I'm going to die, even though I obviously knew that before my experience. Thoughts, anyone? Story 10. Today on our walk to my daughter's bus stop, my oldest daughter, Em, says, "Are we living in a storybook?" I reply with, "No, why would you say something like that?" Her response gave me goosebumps. Because sometimes I feel like someone is reading my story and telling me what to do. I feel like my nightmares are a scary story that someone's telling. My youngest daughter, S, chimes in. "Yes, Em, we're a story." M, "Do you feel it too, S?" S, "Yes, and sometimes I know what's gonna happen." Me, "What do you mean?" S, "Yesterday, I knew we would make bracelets at school." Her first day at school was yesterday. M, "Sometimes I dream what's going to happen in my day and I try to change it, but it doesn't work. Just like you can't change a storybook. It's always the same." This conversation went on for a good 5 minutes, mainly talking about who they think writes the story and dreams they've had about their stories. It ended with, M, "I know I'm right because one time someone told me I can't change who I am. I'll always be who I'm going to be." Does anyone else have weird stories like this that their kids tell? I know it's not related, but both girls complain of shadow people in their room.